Good afternoon, gardeners. It's Sunday, April 11th, and it's a gorgeous spring day here on the southeastern coast of North Carolina. And today I want to teach you all how to have incredible success growing fig trees in ground. Over the past few years, I've really gotten into growing figs. They are my favorite fruit tree to grow, and what I've learned is that certain varieties have developed a reputation as being very vigorous growers, whereas other varieties have developed reputations as being really slow growers lacking vigor. And those varieties that are notable for lacking vigor, it's usually advised that they are grafted onto a more vigorous rootstock to help them grow more quickly. And I have to tell you that I'm just not seeing that myself. Last year, at the end of March, I planted 6 fig trees in ground along my fence that I was espaliering, and 3 of those fig trees are notorious for not being the strongest growers on their own roots. And those varieties are Martinique Ramada, Col de Dame Blanc, and Col de Dame Noir. They have hit or miss reputations for vigor. Now, all 6 of the fig trees that I grew in ground grew like weeds. By the end of October, every single one of the fig trees were at least 6 feet wide and grew anywhere from 6 to 10 feet tall. None of them were grafted. They were all on their own feet, and they grew with incredible vigor. So I'm of the mindset that fig tree vigor is actually more environmental than anything else. And the reason why I think all of my fig trees have grown like weeds, despite their reputation for maybe being tricky when planted on their own roots, is because I set my fig trees up for success. And I think it all boils down to 3 separate things. And 2 of them are little tips, and one of them is a really big tip that I think is often misconstrued when planting fruit trees. So today I want to share with you the 2 small tips and the 1 huge tip, the one biggest secret, in my opinion, that there is when growing fig trees and setting them up for vigor and success when planting them in ground. My very first tip is a small tip, but I think it makes a big difference, and that is checking the soil pH of the location that you are planting your fig tree. Now, fig trees prefer a soil pH of about 6.0 to 6.5, which means that they prefer a mildly acidic soil. Remember, 7 is neutral, so anything lower than 7 is acidic and anything higher than 7 is alkaline. So before you plant your fig tree, you want to make sure that you're not planting it in a location that is both too alkaline or too acidic. You want to make sure it's in that 6 to 7 range. And I have one of these nifty soil pH testers. Some of you may argue that these things aren't really accurate, but I found that they do work fairly well. I wanted to test it for myself, and you can't test these in a liquid. However, I did test this by placing it in soil and pouring a little bit of vinegar around the soil, and it immediately changed pH as it should. So I think this does work fairly well. And it looks like my soil pH is about neutral to slightly above neutral. So it's pretty close to the desired range that the fig trees like to be planted in. However, it is a little bit too alkaline. So when your soil pH like this is off only slightly and you need to acidify it just a little bit, all you really have to do is periodically drop some coffee grounds around your trees. Coffee grounds have a pH of about 5. So if you periodically just top dress your soil with coffee grounds, it will bring the pH down, and since we're already close to the range that we want our fig tree to be in, they will perform pretty well. Of course, if you need to make your soil more basic, you can use things like garden lime to raise your soil pH and make it a little bit more alkaline. But make sure that your soil is pretty well in range of where figs want to be before you pick that spot. And whatever you do, do not use strong fertilizers that are made to acidify the soil, like fertilizers like Hollytone that are made for holly and rhododendron and blueberries. That'll be way too acidic and you will make your trees sick. The next tip that I want to give you is to plant your fig trees in sandy, loamy soil. Now, I'm very fortunate because I'm about 9 miles away from the coast on the southeastern tip of North Carolina, and I'm in a plot that is mostly sandy soil. So my entire plot tends to have very good drainage. What you see right in front of you is a slight raised bed that I'm constructing that is going to house my new fig trees. And I'm fortunate because I have this sandy loam. This is the exact type of soil that you want to plant your fig trees in. And I want to show you how I made this soil. So this is my rear property right here, and back behind my fence about 500 feet is a swamp. So down here in the rear, it can get a little bit wet and murky underneath that soil. And all of the grass that is in the rear of my property is actually weeds that more or less popped up. So these are the native grasses native to the area. This is not a real lawn. So what I did was, last year I borrowed my neighbor's tiller and I set the tines on about 3 or 4 inches, and I set out a 4-foot area off of my fence, and I took his tiller and I chopped up all of that grass multiple times and I mixed it into the soil. So all of this grass that you see here was incorporated into my native sandy soil, and then I placed this weed barrier on top of it. And I did this back in November. So this weed barrier was sitting on top of my mixed and tilled soil for about 5 months, and underneath this black weed barrier it just went to work decaying and breaking down. And when I was done, I pulled the barrier off and I was left with this gorgeous brownish black sandy loam. And here you can see what the soil kind of looks like. It looks like beach sand that somebody mixed like a little bit of compost or topsoil into. It has the same consistency of beach sand, but because it had all of that organic matter in it that was breaking down for 5 months, it just has this really nice feel to it. And we got about 3/4 of an inch of rain yesterday. We just had a downpour, and you'd never know it because this soil, it just laps it up. It has fantastic drainage. So the best kind of soil to plant your fig trees in is that sandy soil that you can mix and amend with organic matter like compost, or tilled under grass, or tilled under leaves that are chopped up. That'll give you the perfect medium to grow your figs in. Now I know what you're thinking, that's great for you. You have sandy, loamy soil. You're very lucky. I'm not that lucky. I have a heavier clay soil. So what am I supposed to do? Well, that's not necessarily a problem either. Clay soil is actually beneficial in many ways because it's typically higher in nutrients and it requires less fertilizing than sandy soil. My sandy soil requires a lot of fertilizing because we get a lot of rain here and it drains away the nutrients very quickly. However, this brings me into my next point, my biggest point, what I think is my #1 secret for growing fantastic, vigorous in-ground figs that grow like weeds. And that is planting your fig trees high. Here are all of my fig trees that I planted last year, and they grew with incredible vigor, like I mentioned before. Now, please excuse the appearance of the fig trees right now. We got hit by a hard freeze last week that was almost an entire month late from our typical last hard freeze date. And these all had 4 to 8 inches of new growth on them, and they all got absolutely cooked, so they're in recovery mode, but they will come back. Now, when I planted these fig trees, I made sure that I put down some barrier right here. And this barrier is about 3 to 4 inches tall because I wanted all of my fig trees planted in a raised bed, and there's a very good reason for this. And that's because when you see figs growing in their native climates, figs like to send out a ton of surface roots. Now, somewhere along the line, I don't know where this started, but people have recommended burying their figs deep. And I think that's because fig trees have the ability to root along the nodes of the branches in the trunk. And I think people confuse them with tomato plants. Like a tomato plant, they send roots out all along the trunk of the tomato plant. So the deeper you grow them, the more roots you'll get. But that's very easy on a tomato plant because tomato plants have thousands of little tiny hairs, and the life cycle of a tomato plant is 6 to 8 months. They root very quickly. They have a very short and fast life. If you bury your fig trees deeply, those nodes may never root for you. They just might not. So you're actually taking that root mass and you're putting it very deep, and you are preventing that tree from sending out surface roots. And remember, the root structure is the foundation of your tree. So the faster it can send out feeder roots to search for nutrients all along the top layer of the soil, the more the tree is going to grow, the faster it's going to establish. So I strongly recommend planting your fig trees 2 to 4 inches high if you're in sandy soil, or if you are in clay soil, you may want to consider planting your fig trees on a mound, similar to how people grow avocado trees in clay soil. Sometimes they have to build raised beds for them. And while figs will tolerate some degree of wet feet in clay soil, My general recommendation is to always plant them high, so the fig trees will send out those surface roots that run all throughout the top layer of mulch and compost that you will put down heavily underneath that tree. And I want to show you what I'm talking about right here. I top dressed all of my figs with about 2 to 3 inches of compost and then another 2 to 3 inches of this hardwood mulch. And I'm right in between 2 fig trees. And if I simply dig down right about here, what I'm going to find is, you see this root right here? This root that I just pulled out right here, this is a feeder root of one of these fig trees, and they're all over the place. Here's another one. Here's another feeder root. If I dig underneath my hardwood mulch layer, it is like a blanket. Here's another one. It is just a blanket of fig roots. They have sent feeder roots all throughout the compost and mulch layer, and that is how you rapidly develop vigor. When you bury your fig trees deeply, they can't send out that surface root mass like they can when they're planted up high in that nice, loamy, fresh, loose mix of organic matter. You're basically suffocating them, and you have to wait for them to grow out of it if you're going to plant the trees deeply. So similar to last year, I'm going through the trouble of building myself another raised bed so I can get 3 to 4 inches of compost and mulch on top of my fig trees that I will plant high. Now, the one thing I'm changing is, last year I used that cheap plastic terrace board, and I hate it because it's impossible to make straight. So this year I went out and I bought some of these nice brick pavers, and I painstakingly laid them all out. I think it'll give a much better look and a more permanent feel to the bed. So that's really up to you if you want to do that or not. But however you build your raised bed to put your fig trees in is up to you. So now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to plant these fig trees. I have 6 total, and I have these stakes placed which are going to represent where my trees go. They're all spaced 6 feet apart, and I'm going to espalier them just like I did my other fig trees that I planted last year. So now I'm going to dig my holes, and I'm going to get the area prepped for planting. Now I have all 6 of the holes dug for my fig trees, and over here you can see all 6 of the fig trees that I'm going to plant. And I measured the root masses of these fig trees, and they're all about 11 inches tall. And I dug my holes all to a depth of anywhere from 8 to 9 inches. So that means that each of these root balls on the fig trees will be planted about 2 to 3 inches high. Now, I'm not going to give you a tutorial on how to plant a fig tree. I've done that before, and I will link to that video above if you want all the details. If you've never planted a fig tree before, or you've never had success planting them, I strongly suggest giving that a look. That'll help you a lot. But I'll go over the cliff notes really quickly. Dig a square hole with a square shovel. You don't want to create a rounded basket because that can promote the roots from spiraling and becoming root bound. In each hole I have a mixture of bone meal and an organic fertilizer, somewhere around 555 NPK. Make sure that all NPKs are represented. You don't have to have a 555, you can do a 444 or 454, just make sure all the numbers are close. And this year I'm using a new product called micronized azomite, which is rock dust that has a lot of trace minerals in it. I'm going to try them just to see how everything works out. Hopefully that'll make my trees even more vigorous. Now I'm going to put them all in the hole, and I'll show you what that looks like. And now you can see all of the trees planted. They're planted just a few inches high. And now that everything is planted, I'm going to take my rake and I'm going to backfill all of the holes. And now I backfilled them about 2/3 of the way, and I put another dusting of fertilizer and bone meal and a little bit more micronized azomite on top of them, just to give the tops of the roots a little bit of an additional feeding. And now that they've all been fed, I'm going to put the rest of the soil around them. And now you can see all of the fig trees planted and backfilled and compacted all around. And you'll see they all have something like a 2 to 3 inch reveal where the root masses are hanging out of the soil. Now that we're zoomed in on the root mass of this fig tree, you can see all of the little spaghetti-like roots They look like angel hair pasta. There's thousands of them. And again, the reason why we want to plant our fig trees a couple inches high like this is because we want those surface roots to run all over all of the compost that we're about to backfill this raised bed with. Those surface roots are going to very easily traverse the compost. They're going to grow very quickly, and they're going to quickly establish this tree and uptake those nutrients. So there's going to see a huge boost of growth in this tree because we planted it so high. Now right here I have simple bags of cow manure compost that I bought from Lowe's. Lowe's stocks very local cow manure compost to where I live on the southeastern coast of North Carolina. It's pretty good stuff. I've had nothing but good luck with it. So now I'm going to tear these bags open, and I'm going to hill that up around the raised roots. So the compost level is going to be flush with the top of the raised brick, and that's going to allow the roots to easily traverse this raised bed that I'm about to make. And here are all the trees with the compost placed. Overall, I'm extremely happy with the way that this turned out and the way everything looks. All of the root masses are flush with the brick, which is exactly what I was looking for. So the compost has completely buried the root mass, and this is exactly what we're looking for, because now that root mass is going to be able to send those surface roots that we want so much, because they are going to immediately take over this bed and they are going to allow lots of vigor inside that tree. Because we didn't bury our tree deeply, we're going to get far more roots on the surface, which means more roots are going to be able to consume more nutrients, and it's going to support more growth. So now we just have to water them all in. So now our fig trees have been watered in, and the last thing that we need to do is mulch them. And the purpose of the mulch is to retain all of the moisture in the soil. We want as even moisture as possible for our fruit trees. The other benefit is we want a constant layer of organic matter that is always breaking down very slowly, and it will slowly feed the tree as it decays. And you will get the additional benefit of weed suppression, because weed seeds will often fail to take hold if there is a mulch layer. So what I'm going to use around my tree is I'm going to use this regular old bag of natural hardwood shredded bark mulch that I purchased from Lowe's for $3. Now it doesn't matter what type of mulch you use as long as it is a natural mulch. Don't use anything that says dyed mulch. That's usually just broken down pallets and other junk wood that has chemical dyes added. We want to use something natural, so you can use hardwood mulch, you can use pine bark nuggets, you can use old hay or straw, you can use weed-free grass clippings, you could use chopped up leaves. Just use something in a layer about an inch or two thick in order to retain moisture. And now the mulch has been applied. And when you apply compost and mulch, there's really only two rules that you need to adhere to. The first rule is make sure that the layer is thick enough that it actually matters. So for compost and mulch, I recommend that each layer should be at least 2 to 3 inches thick in order to provide enough nutrition and hold in the moisture. And the final tip that really matters is you need to make sure that the mulch and the compost layer does not mound up against the trunk of the tree. When they mound up against the trunk of the tree, we call those mulch volcanoes. They are very bad. And the reason why they're bad is because the purpose of the compost and mulch layer is to decompose. So worms and mealybugs and fungi and bacteria are constantly going to be consuming and decomposing the compost and mulch layer. So you're going to have rot occurring at all times. And you do not want rot to occur around the trunk. You want to have a several inch buffer around the trunk. You don't want to have any compost or mulch touching. So always make sure that you have a buffer ring around your tree so you don't have any rotting material up against your tree trunk. And if you follow those 3 simple tips, you will almost certainly increase your chances of success growing fig trees in ground. So everybody, I sure hope you found this video helpful. If you did, please hit that like button, and if you haven't already subscribed to the channel, please subscribe for future updates and more videos like these. If you're curious about any of the products that I use in my garden, they are all linked in my Amazon storefront in the video description. Thank you all again so much for watching, and I hope to see all of you again on the next video.
Oh, look at this. Dale's getting his bath. Dad, get me out of here. This is paw abuse. This is paw abuse. This is paw abusive. Get me out of here, Dad. This isn't fair. Oh, look at him. He's going to smell so good.